Good afternoon, 8th graders. Your teacher is back to help you learn the lessons in mathematics. I am teacher Meshell Niere of Tambungan National High School, Pantukan South District, and I will be your guide in enhancing your minds in facing challenges in grade 8 mathematics. Please prepare your papers and pens. Listen and understand carefully, and let us have a wonderful day of learning if-then statements. For this afternoon's session, we have three objectives. 1. Define if-then statement. 2. Determine the relation between the hypothesis and the conclusion of an if-then statement. And 3. Transform statements into if-then statements. Every day, we deal with so many things such as logic, reasoning, and proving to help us in our decision making. For instance, when I went out in the house, the cloud seemed so cloudy. So I went back and get the umbrella because I think it will rain. Another, I eat vegetables and drink vitamins every day to keep my immune system strong, or I have to minimize playtime to give enough time for myself to answer my modules and assessment tasks. Our lesson for this afternoon is quite similar to these examples. In this module, you will learn and understand the key concepts on reasoning and proving. I guess you will be more interested and motivated to make your day productive after listening to this lesson. Are you ready? So let's get started. Our first objective says, define if-then statement. If-then statement is defined as a statement composed of two clauses. 1. The if clause and the then clause. Again, if-then statement is a statement composed of two clauses, the if clause and the then clause. The if clause in the if-then statement is represented by P, and the then clause is represented by Q. Again, the if clause is represented by P and the then clause is represented by Q. Joining or combining these two statements, P and Q, using the words if and then makes a conditional statement. The conditional statement has two parts, the hypothesis and the conclusion. The conditional statement has two parts, the hypothesis and the conclusion. Conditional statement now is an if-then statement that has two parts, the hypothesis, which is the if part, and the conclusion, the then part. Let us consider the following series of examples for us to understand better what conditional statement means. Our first example for conditional statement is, if we leave the house early, then we can catch the bus. Another example. If it is cloudy, then it will rain. Our next example for conditional statement is, if you recycle bottles, cans, and papers, then you will help save the environment. Another example. If an angle measures 90 degrees, then it is a right angle. The last one is, if two angles have the same measure, then they are congruent. Based on our discussion earlier, we mentioned that conditional statement has two parts, the hypothesis and the conclusion. This time, we will identify the conclusion and the hypothesis of each conditional. Our first conditional says, if we leave the house early, then we can catch the bus. The hypothesis for this conditional is, we leave the house early. While the conclusion is, what do you think? Correct. We can catch the bus. How about our second conditional? If it is cloudy, then it will rain. Based on our previous example, what is the hypothesis for this conditional? Correct. The hypothesis for this conditional is, it is cloudy. While the conclusion is, it will rain. Our third conditional is, if you recycle bottles, cans, and papers, then you will help save the environment. Let us identify the hypothesis and the conclusion for this conditional. The hypothesis for this conditional statement is, you recycle bottles, cans, and papers. Again, the hypothesis for this conditional statement, if you recycle bottles, cans, and papers, then you will help save the environment. The hypothesis is, you recycle bottles, cans, and papers. What do you suppose is the conclusion? Very good. You will help save the environment. Again, the hypothesis says, you recycle bottles, cans, and papers. And the conclusion will be, you will help save the environment. Now, we will proceed with our fourth example or fourth conditional, which involves geometry. Our fourth conditional says, if an angle measures 90 degrees, then it is a right angle. The hypothesis for this conditional is, an angle measures 90 degrees. Again, the hypothesis for this conditional is, an angle measures 90 degrees. How about its conclusion? If its hypothesis is an angle measures 90 degrees, then its conclusion is, it is a right angle. Again, the conclusion of the hypothesis, an angle measures 90 degrees, then the conclusion is, it is a right angle. Our last conditional for this series of examples is, if two angles have the same measure, then they are congruent. Again, if two angles have the same measure, then they are congruent. We'll identify the hypothesis and the conclusion. The hypothesis for this conditional is two angles have the same measure. Again, two angles have the same measure. While the conclusion is they are congruent. The conclusion of this conditional is again they are congruent. This time, I want you to observe closely the hypothesis and the conclusions of each conditional. Again, observe closely the hypothesis and the conclusion of each conditional. What have you observed? Correct. The word if in the hypothesis is being removed, while the word then in the conclusion is also being removed. Let me emphasize again, the words if and then are not part of the hypothesis nor of the conclusion. We are done with defining and illustrating conditional statement. Before we will continue our discussion, let's pause for a while and have a short break, and we will be back after a few minutes.
The Radyo Z-eskwela program of the Division of Davao de Oro is being brought to you by Nueda Builders Construction and Supply Incorporated, Maverick Builders Incorporated, Mitch Construction and Supply, Archicons Architectural Construction and Supply, DB Construction and Supply, Hanaway Builders Corporation, Phoenix Corvada Tagum Gasoline Station, Master Construction and Supplies, Mackenzie Builders, GP&H Construction Incorporated, Metro Gear Construction Corporation, NEN Builders and Development Services Corporation, Max Mays Enterprises Incorporated, We Inc. Construction Company, Rangay Construction and Supply, East Sussex Enterprise, WM Construction, Councilor Boogie and Miss Marjorie Vertodazo, Icon Builders and Supply, and Apex Mining Company Incorporated.
Good afternoon once again, and we are back for the continuation of our discussion this afternoon, the if-then statements. Moreover, the if-then statement has a truth value of true or false. A conditional statement has a truth value if the hypothesis is true while the conclusion is also true. Therefore, both the hypothesis and the conclusion should be true for a conditional statement to have a truth value. We will go back to some of our examples earlier, and we will have more for us to identify whether a certain statement or a certain conditional or a certain if-then statement has a truth value of true or false. We'll have the conditional statement: if an angle measures 90 degrees, then it is a right angle. The hypothesis for this conditional is an angle measures 90 degrees, and its conclusion, it is a right angle. When we try to observe closely the hypothesis and the conclusion, both are true. Therefore, the truth value of this conditional is true. Again, the truth value of our conditional is true. Let us have another example. If two angles have the same measure, then they are congruent. The hypothesis for this conditional is two angles have the same measure, while the conclusion is they are congruent. The hypothesis two angles have the same measure is true, while the conclusion they are congruent is also true. Therefore, the truth value for this conditional is also true. Let us try this third example. A triangle is a polygon. Let us divide this statement into two parts to identify the hypothesis and conclusion. A triangle and is a polygon. Transform this into a conditional statement if P then Q. Hence, the if-then statement is if a shape is a triangle, then it is a polygon. We can also say if it is a triangle, then it is a polygon. Take note that we can add words as long as it will not change the meaning of the given statement. So, what is the truth value of this statement? If a shape is a triangle, then it is a polygon. The answer is obviously true. Why? A triangle is a polygon because it is a plane figure with a number of straight line segments connected to form a closed plane figure. To sum it up, the conditional statement is also called an if-then statement. If-then statement has two parts, the if, which is the hypothesis, and the then, which is the conclusion. A conditional statement to be true shows that when hypothesis is true, the conclusion is also true. While to be false, you need to have a counterexample where hypothesis is true but the conclusion is false. Learning if-then statements. Are you ready? So let us begin. In the conditional statements to be given, identify the hypothesis, conclusion, if-then statement, and the truth value. An even number is divisible by 2, our first conditional. Now, identify the hypothesis, conclusion, conditional statement, and truth value. Its hypothesis is a real number is an even number. The conclusion for this conditional is it is divisible by 2. From its hypothesis and conclusion, we can now draw the conditional statement if a real number is an even number, then it is divisible by 2. How about its truth value? Let us inspect whether the hypothesis is true. A real number is an even number, which is true. The conclusion, it is divisible by 2, is also true. Therefore, the truth value is correct. It is true. Let us now fill the table to complete the task, which serves as our second example. Our second conditional says a rectangle has 2 pairs of parallel sides. Out from our given conditional, a rectangle has 2 pairs of parallel sides. Our hypothesis could be the figure is a rectangle. And we can have our conclusion as it has 2 pairs of parallel sides. Out from the hypothesis, the figure is a rectangle and the conclusion, it has two pairs of parallel sides, we can now say that our conditional statement might be, if the figure is a rectangle, then it has two pairs of parallel sides. How about its truth value? For this conditional to be true, to has a truth value of true, hypothesis and conclusion should be true first. The hypothesis, the figure is a rectangle, is a true statement, while the conclusion, it has two pairs of parallel sides, is also a true statement. Therefore, we can say that the truth value for this conditional is. Do you have any other answers? Remember that as long as it did not change the meaning of the statement, it will still be correct. Very good. A true one. Did you get the correct answer? Okay, very good. Let us now proceed to our next example. Our next example, or our next if-then statement or conditional statement says, if MJ is in grade 8, then he is 14 years old. Let us now identify its hypothesis, conclusion, conditional statement, and truth value. Our hypothesis for this certain conditional statement is MJ is in grade 8. The conclusion now is he is 14 years old. From our hypothesis and our conclusion, we can now say that the conditional statement could be, if MJ is in grade 8, then he is 14 years old. How about its truth value? The truth value for the conditional, if MJ is in grade 8, then he is 14 years old, is correct. It is false. The truth value of the conditional statement is false because the conclusion is not true to all cases. Not all grade 8 students are exactly 14 years old, depending on their birth month, or maybe they started school earlier. Did you find our activity interesting? This time is your turn. Kindly get your papers and pens and let's start our second learning task. Let us check your answers when we come back. Have fun, and I know you can do it. So let's begin by giving you instructions to our next activity. I want you to listen to our instruction. The instruction says, change the statement to if, then, or conditional statements. Identify the hypothesis and the conclusion. Write also the truth value of the statement. Again, change the statement to if, then, or conditional statement. Identify the hypothesis and the conclusion. Write also the truth value of the statement. Now, the statement to be changed into if, then, or conditional statement is an equilateral triangle is equiangular. Again, the statement is an equilateral triangle is equiangular. After changing this one to if-then statement or conditional statement, identify also the hypothesis, the conclusion, and above all, write also the statement value or the truth value of the statement. Before checking your answers and for you to have time to give the hypothesis, to give the conclusion, along with the conditional statement and the truth value, you are given a short break. And after the break, we will be back right away and check your answers.
The Radyo Z-eskwela program of the Division of Davao de Oro is being brought to you by Niere Builders Construction and Supply Incorporated, Maverick Builders Incorporated, Mitch Construction and Supply, Archicon's Architectural Construction and Supply, DB Construction and Supply, Hanaway Builders Corporation, Phoenix Corvada Tagum Gasoline Station, Master Construction and Supplies, Mackenzie Builders, GP&H Construction Incorporated, Metro Gear Construction Corporation, NEN Builders and Development Services Corporation, Max Mays Enterprises Incorporated, We Inc. Construction Company, Rangay Construction and Supply, East Sussex Enterprise, WM Construction, Councilor Boogie and Miss Marjorie Vertodazo, Icon Builders and Supply, and Apex Mining Company Incorporated.
Welcome back to the last part of our discussion this afternoon. Before we had our break, you were asked to change the statement to if-then statement or conditional statement and identify the hypothesis, the conclusion, and the truth value. The given statement was, an equilateral triangle is equiangular. Its hypothesis is, the figure is an equilateral triangle. Okay, how about its conclusion? The conclusion is, it is equiangular. Out from the hypothesis and the conclusion we can now form the conditional statement. The conditional statement is, if the figure is an equilateral triangle, then it is equiangular. How about its truth value? Correct. The answer is true. I hope you get all the correct answers, and before we will end our discussion this afternoon, we will have first a summary to what we have discussed. Remember, if-then statement is also known as conditional statement. Again, if-then statement is also known as conditional statement. And the conditional or the if-then statement is composed of two clauses, the if clause and the then clause. The if clause is known as the hypothesis, while the then clause is known as the conclusion. Be reminded also that in transforming statements into conditional statement, it is not always necessary to add a word in the transformed sentence. There are sentences that can be transformed by only adding the words if and then. However, some statements might sound better or more emphasized when we modify the statement. For example, in the previous example that we had, a triangle is a polygon. The conditional statement becomes, if a shape is a triangle, then it is a polygon. Just remember that adding words to the transformed statement is okay as long as it will not change the meaning of the statement. Remember also that an if-then statement has a truth value of true or false. A conditional statement to be true shows that when the hypothesis is true, the conclusion is also true. And this serves as the end of our discussion for this afternoon's session talking about if-then statement. I hope these afternoon sessions give you more realizations and a very important skill in mathematics. God bless everyone, and once again, good afternoon.
Radyo Z-eskwela Executive Committee, the School's Division Superintendent, Eufemia T. Gamutin Seso 5, Assistant Schools Division Superintendent, Dr. Romel R. Handayan, OIC Curriculum Implementation Division Chief, Karina S. Frasco, School Governance and Operations Division Chief, Dr. Ruben J. Riponte. Members: Cecilia Morales, Dr. Hilda A. Opeña, Dr. Arlene B. Lim, Dr. Eldicris B. Calzadora, Dr. Dexter A. Siquinia, Nohara O. Pinute, Noemi P. Canales, Dr. Grace D. Pontillas, Virgilito C. Pabrices, Juanito Lapiceros, Engineer Norberto S. Manlangi, Jomar M. Dumupoy, Bob Dalan S. Milabat, Medard T. Ampit, and Paz Eugenia Villusino. Technical Working Committee, Productions and Communications, Lorely E. Quijano, Given G. Hinampas, Judyland D. Yu, Donna D. T. Bolifer, Mary Rose N. Resma, Riven Manuel, Irene Lea C. Manguhon, and Bessie Aya N. Banyes. Social Media and Packaging Team, Christian and Hara L. Martesio, William R. Ranara, Joan T. Iscoton, Roberto S. Acusar Jr., May B. Istanyol, Richard H. Arellano, Lee L. S. Blanco, Ralph A. Tabanyag, Angelo Gutierrez Jr., and Jade Karen Arais.